final couple of things, guys. And I do want you to write this down also in your notes. When you have x equals a number, it will be a vertical line crossing the x-axis at that value. Okay, so please write that down and please pay attention to what this means. Let's take a look at this first one before reading anything else. When you have x equals a number, you guys see this right here? There's an equation. It says x equals -3. Yeah? So if I told you to graph this, you would be thinking, wait a minute, I can't get y by itself. I can't do function form. That's exactly right. You can't do function form because there's not even a y right there. Okay? So what you need to do is recognize that the only thing that matters right here is that your x value is -3. So when you go to an xy table, could we plug in a 0, a 1, and a 2? The answer is no. You can't put 0 for x. Why? Because x has to be equal to -3. So right here, this is a special case. It's so easy that some people will get confused. All you need to know is that your x value has to be -3. So technically on your xy table, your x value has to be -3 on all situations. Now what about your y values? It doesn't even matter what y is because there is no y value in your equation. So it could be anything you want. It could be 0, could be -1, could be +3, whatever you want. And those are your coordinates right there. Now, what's that going to look like if I go to the coordinate -3, 0? -3, 0 is right there. If I go to the coordinate -3, -1, it's right there. If I go to the coordinate -3, +3, it's right there. What kind of line is this? It's a vertical line. So this is a vertical line going right through that value of x equals -3. So what I'm explaining above is really a shortcut, so you don't have to think about this whole process of an xy table, and you don't have to think, oh, it has to be -3 for x. I mean, this is the explanation of why it's a vertical line. But what I wrote up here is when you have x equals a number, we have x equals a number, it'll be a vertical line. What does that mean? It means up and down, crossing the x-axis at that value. So it's a vertical line crossing the x-axis at -3. Do you understand that? It's pretty easy to understand. It's pretty straightforward. If I had x equals +4 and I wanted to graph x equals +4, that would be a vertical line going through the x-axis at +4. If I had x equals -1, that would be a vertical line crossing the x-axis at -1. Now let's read the other truth right here. When you have y equals a number, it's not going to be a vertical line. It'll be a horizontal line crossing the y-axis at that value. So if I look at y equals 2, I know it's going to be a horizontal line crossing the y-axis at 2. So here's my y-axis. Y points to the sky. I go to the y value of 2 and I draw a horizontal line right through it. So I'm going to draw a horizontal line right through the y value of 2 and I'm done. Now, that's the actual graph, but if you wanted an explanation, why is this equation, y equals 2, why is it a horizontal line? Well, because the only thing that this cares about is that your y values are 2. So if you go to an xy table to create some coordinates, to find some coordinates, the only thing that this cares about is that your y values are 2. So you'd have a 2 on the y, a 2 on the y, a 2 on the y. And what about your x's? It doesn't even matter what x is, because there is no x's in your original simple equation. So in other words, x could be anything you want. It could be a 4, it could be a -1, it could be a 2, whatever, anything. Anything you want, 14, right? You could have 14 and 2. That's a coordinate also. Now, what kind of line will that produce? Well, if you look at 4, 2, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. There it is, a dot right there. If you go -1 and 2, there it is. If you go 2, 2, there it is. If you go 14 and 2, there it is. So it will be a line that's horizontal. Does that make sense? We will have to graph all these different types of equations, and we do have to understand how to use an XY table to be able to come up with the coordinates to be able to graph these equations. So I'm going to hand out a homework assignment right now. And here's your homework assignment. And it has the steps right there, guys, on graphing. Step 1 is to rewrite it in function form. Step 2 is to make an XY table, plug in 3 easy numbers, most of the time 0, 1, and 2, unless you have a fraction on the X. And then graph your coordinates and draw your line. So it does have all the instructions. I do want to mention one thing, that when you look at number 2, don't get scared. F of X is the same thing as Y. So you could just pretend that it says Y equals. Anytime you have an F of X, a G of X, H of X, or G of H even, you could just pretend or rewrite this whole thing and say that this is really Y and this guy over here is really X. Okay? It's just notation. There's nothing to get scared of. F of X, G of H, G of X, Q of X, R of X. It doesn't matter. That's just like a Y. Okay? Is there anyone that you guys would like to try right now?
Is it 14?
Yeah, let's try number 6. All right, let's do number 6. So this is really like Y equals 1/4 X plus 2. You might as well write that. Y equals 1/4 X plus 2. So is it in function form? Yes. So I could just jump to an XY table. Now, you know what? Let me make it more to the left so I could have more space. XY table. Okay, so for my inputs, I could always use 0. 0 is a great option, always. But what other numbers would be nice? Exactly, 4. And you know what? That's really all you need. But you could also use 8, or you could also use -4. I'm not going to use 8. You know why? Because 8's going to be off the graph. But I will use -4. So when I plug in 0, it's really going to be 1/4 times 0 plus 2. Now when I plug in a 0 in here, it's just going to be 0 plus 2. So my answer is 2. So 0, 2 is a coordinate. There it is. Now when I plug in 4, right into here, I want to have 1/4, and I might as well just write it in there, plus or times 4 right there. And what happens is that those 4's cancel out, and I have 1 plus 2 left over. And 1 plus 2 is really 3. So when I plug in 4, I get out a 3. And ladies and gentlemen, that's all you really need to graph. Let me go to the coordinate 4, 3. That's going to be 4 on the X, 1, 2, 3 on the Y. It's up here. So I really have the coordinate 4, 3 right there. And if I draw my line through those 2 points, I'm good. Now, let me do the final one where I have 1/4 times this input, -4. And then plus 2 at the very end. My voice is going. Sorry. So the 4's cancel, but you're going to have 1 times -1 left over, plus 2. So 1 times -1 is -1, I'm sorry. And -1 plus 2 is 1. So we really have the coordinate -4, 1. And if you go to -4, 1, you'll see that it does land perfectly on that line. -1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is right there. So there's my coordinate. And the only reason why we do 3 is just to feel a little bit better about drawing our line. We see that all 3 dots land on the line, so we know that we did it right. Feel more comfortable. And that's how you graph. You need to do the rest of these for homework. I'll see you tomorrow.